Thank you very much. My name is Memo Ngui. I want to take you through this job banding presentation. The reason why we've prepared this job banding presentation is to help job seekers go through the motion of looking for jobs. We find that a lot of people face challenges in terms of how they structure their job search. And this presentation will cover quite a number of issues. And the things that are going to be covered include preparing a CV and also handling an interview. The most important part in this presentation is that it's not a checklist, but it will give you hints in terms of how you can look for a job. As industrial psychology consultants, we face a number of challenges in trying to help people look for jobs because they have not done their homework in terms of the issues that they need to cover, in terms of the issues that they need to address in their CV, or in terms of how they should handle themselves when they are going for interviews. This is precisely what we want to cover. But before I go into some of the details, I want to be able to highlight to you some of the challenges. In order for you to be able to get a job, the most important part is that you must have a good CV. Properly prepared. We face a number of challenges with the kind of CV that we normally get from people. People don't pay attention to the CV that they get. In some instances, you actually think people are just dumping the CVs with the hope that they will get a job. It will not happen that you will get a job if you have not prepared properly, if you have not done a good CV. A good CV for you is the first thing that the person who is going to look at your CV or who will look at your credentials is going to look at. And if it represents that someone has not done their homework in terms of preparation, it will be thrown away. And this is precisely why some people will never get jobs. The other important point to take note of is match the job requirements with what is on the CV. You can't have a generic CV for all the jobs. It's important for you to be able to match what you have got on your CV to what is required by each particular job. For example, you find that an accountant in a manufacturing company might be required to do certain things that probably an accountant in a retail entity might not be able to do. So, depending on the job adverts, you must be able to restructure your CV to match what the employer wants. The keywords in the adverts are very critical for you to be able to take note of. It's also important for people to respond early to adverts. If you respond after a few days, chances are you might not get the job. The challenges that are there now is that because of technology, people can send their CVs very quickly, and employers what they're doing now, or agents what they're doing now, people who send their CVs early, if I'm looking for 10 CVs and I get them in the next 5 minutes, I will consider those. Anything that comes out after that might not be considered. So that is very critical. It's also important for people to understand that dumping CVs with the agencies is not good enough. For example, we do get people, for example, after advertising for a post MD or a finance director, you get clerks applying, you get buyers applying, you get engineers applying. What it basically means, the person is directionless. What is the point? You actually get more frustrated if you don't match your own qualification and experience to what is required by the prospective employer. So we discourage people from just applying for any position. They must look at what they have and what is required. Yes, people think you can get a chance. It's possible, especially for positions that do not have enough candidates. But if you look at our job markets with an unemployment rates of over 80%, what it basically means is there are a lot of people who are looking for jobs, and the jobs are not available. If you look at employment figures released recently, you find that employment has actually gone down in certain sectors. It has increased in certain sectors, but generally there is a high level of unemployment. Basically means competition is very high. I also want to highlight one important aspect or a question that we often asked by prospective job seekers. Some people ask us, I have been sending my CV for a year and received a response in terms of getting an interview. When you apply, there is no guarantee that you are going to be called for an interview. And in most cases, these people who have not been called for interviews, there are chances that the CVs are not okay, they are not matching what the employer wants, and people also need to understand the way agencies work. Employment agencies, they will send the best CV to the employers because the best CVs will give them business. If I send CVs that are not qualified to an employer, it basically means I'm actually taking myself out of the race because other agencies will send CVs that meet the requirements. So no matter whether someone knows us or knows me personally, knows any consultant personally, it's not possible for us to send CVs that do not meet the requirements simply because we know the person. So that is very important. It's also critical for people to understand that there are certain employers, for example, who will tell you they want people who have worked for this and such an organization. That is a preference for an employer who is our client. There's really nothing you can do about that. And it's also that when you write your CV, if you have worked for good brands, most of the time it's very easy for you to get a job. But if you have worked for organizations that are known for corruption, organizations that are known for not doing the right things, chances are there is no employer who will willingly take an individual from such kind of an organization and put them in their organization. So those are challenges that I thought I must highlight. Then when we come to the types of CV, normally the chronological CV or resume is the most common one and most accepted one in terms of also presentation. When you are preparing your CV, you must always start with your most recent work going backwards. And it's also important to note that what kind of information is required in the CV. For example, you need to make sure that there is contact information. What we also find to be a challenge is that in some instances, people, when they put their contact information, they put alternative contact numbers. In some instances, they put the spouse number, a friend's number, a brother's number. But when employers then try to call these numbers, assuming they have not found you on your number, they also face challenges. Some people are very hostile. In one instance, for example, I can tell you one person that we phoned said, a gentleman said, how did you get the phone number for my wife? I said, look, I'm phoning from an employment agent. They applied for this job. I said, then they cut off the phone. With such kind of feedback, chances are employers will just go to the next person. So be very careful what kind of information you put under your contact information. It's also important to put key achievements. I will explain this in detail later on. Education. It's important to put your education, but only put the education in detail if you're a recent graduate. If you have got lots of experience, there's no need for you to put the degree, all the subjects that you've done in your undergrad degree or postgrad degree. You just need to put your degree in the degree class. Employment history, very critical. You must make sure that that is included in your CV. Obviously, the CV must give your first name and last name. I can tell you, for example, in one instance, we actually got a CV that had no name. And this CV was very interesting. I don't know what the individual had done, but the CV had no name, but they had all the requirements that we required. So we had to call the number that was there and said, Mr. No Name, we actually want to shortlist you, but your CV does not have your name. And they apologized for that. But imagine we are an agent. If this CV had actually arrived direct to an employer, they were just going to throw it away because there is no one who is going to employ an individual who does not put their name on the CV. It also shows lack of seriousness sometimes when people don't put the name on the CV. If CVs are prepared in a hurry, you can make mistakes, and these mistakes can be costly in terms of how you get a job. When you put your name, there is no need, for example, to put Mr. or Miss or Mrs., except for people with the unisex names. Those, I'm sure it's important for you to be able to highlight that. The address must also always be in full, complete address, physical address, no abbreviations. Please don't put abbreviations in your CV. Telephone numbers always includes at least 2 telephone numbers like we have already indicated. Your mobile number is the most convenient number. But if the mobile number is not working, you can actually put another number. But be very careful not to put your current employer's phone numbers. Because some people, when they call you for interviews, if they are not very careful, if they are inexperienced, they might indicate to the employer that we want so and so to come for the interview, and that might jeopardize your chances with your current employer. Email address is one of the convenient ways to get contacted by prospective employers or agencies. So it's very critical that we have got a contact email address. And normally what we encourage is put your Gmail, Yahoo, or any other email address, that is not your employer's email address. The chances are there could be other people who will be reading your emails. So if you put your work email, your boss might have access to your laptop or computer, and they find that you are desperately looking for a job. This might strain the relationship between you and your boss. So even when you are looking for jobs, on an email list and everything, it's always preferable that you put your personal email address, not the employer's email address, so that there is no conflict whatsoever with your current employer. When you put employment dates, it's very important to indicate the employment periods. We get lots of CVs where people don't indicate the employment period. Some people do it deliberately for a reason that we don't know, but it's important that you put employment dates on your CV. This helps the employer to identify the career growth in your CV, and that is important. For example, you can put 3 January 2008 to April 2010. If you don't want to put the specific date, you can actually just say January 2008 to April 2010. That is very critical. Job titles. When you are putting your job titles in your CV, please avoid putting job titles that are not known. What I'm saying there is, in one instance, where it says job title, someone says various. There is no one who is going to be able to employ or make a decision in terms of employing someone when they have just included various as the job title. Why don't you put the correct job title that you are currently holding or that you have held in a career history? It's not vague. For example, you might want to say administrative assistant instead of just saying secretary. These are some of the, and also use the attractive job titles that are common in the market rather than using job titles that are non-existent. Positions like team leader, yes, they're okay, but you need to make sure that you specify team leader in what area, for example. That is also critical. When you are writing your CV, it's also important to include the company that you have worked for. Company name in full. There is no need really to include the address of the employers. This should be followed by a brief description of the business line, because in some instances, an employer might not be aware of what your previous employer does or what previous employer is involved in terms of their business line. So you might say a national retail chain, an established electronics manufacturer, things like that, or a beverages manufacturing company. Those things are very critical on each employer. What do they do? What is their line of business? It makes it very easy for someone who is looking at your CV to be able to make a decision quickly. Professional affiliations. These are critical. Professional affiliations, but only put professional affiliations where you are a current member. What we find in some instances, because people have not updated their CVs, they forget to update their professional affiliations, and these tend to affect the quality of the CV, and in some instances, especially for engineers, where membership of a professional association is a requirement, you might find that you have not updated and you're not a current member, and when the people are shortlisting, they might want just to check whether the person is registered with this professional body. Languages. It's also important to make sure that in your CV you indicate the languages that you speak, and you must indicate the level of fluency for those languages. For example, fluent in French, fluent, understand Spanish, fluent in Ndebele, fluent in Tonga, fluent in Shona. All these things are critical. It helps people make decisions, because there are certain environments where these languages will be required. Education. It's very important to put your education over, starting with your highest qualification, going to the lowest qualification. Like I indicated previously, if you're out of school, you need to make sure that the education details are important, and you must put all the details, degree class, and the subject that you've studied. Especially for graduate trainees, this will help them in terms of, this will help the employer or the agents to actually make a decision on which candidate to shortlist. Okay? It's also important to include your professional training. If you've undergone any professional training courses, the awarding institution or the organization that actually offered that training, the seminars attended, all that is important. That gives a prospective employer an opportunity to look at what you have or what you have attained in your career. It's also very important for me to highlight at this stage that it's not important to write CV as a title on your CV. We know the structure of the document already is a CV, so there is really no need for you to put a resume or a CV again. We don't actually recommend that you do that. You just write the structure that you want and you put your CV. On your CV, things like your fonts are also very critical. In some instances, you find the CV is written all in capital letters. This is not a very good way to write a CV. Please don't put your CV, don't write your CV in capital letters. I'm sure you have noticed that things that are written in capital letters throughout are very difficult to read. You can only do capital letters for your headings. But what we recommend is for your headings, it's better to use title case rather than using the capital letters in your CV. You must never indicate availability in your CV. This should only be included in the CV if you expect to finish a project or if you are working on a project. And also some people always say availability 3 months notice. That is standard. It's not known. You might find that you found a very lucrative job. They want you urgently and they want to negotiate. If you have already put in you need to be able to be available in 3 months, that can jeopardize your chances. So availability, don't even mention availability. These are things that can be discussed in a face-to-face interview with the prospective employer or the agents. So this information, we don't expect to see it in a CV in terms of availability, because we would want you, if the agent phones you and asks you your availability, then that is the time when you must then include the availability details. But otherwise, we discourage you from putting availability in your CV. Another thing that you must also omit from your CV is the reasons for leaving. There is no real point in stating your reason for leaving on your CV. This topic is covered at the interview stage. When you get called for an interview, you actually get an opportunity to explore, to interact with the employer, to ask questions. The employer will have an opportunity to ask you questions, so there's no reason for you to put a reason for leaving. The reason why we discourage you from putting reason for leaving is that in some instances, what we've seen in some CVs, people say reasons for leaving redundant, for example, or retrenched, or employer relocated. These things can have negative connotation depending on the type of employer. They might not actually take you based on what you have put as reasons for leaving. But there is no person who will put reasons for leaving fired, and that is a fact. So why waste your time and put this as reasons for leaving? Salary. Leave out any reference to salary. There is an obsession in the market. There are some people who are obsessed with the kind of salary that is being offered. In most cases, you get people who say, okay, before I submit my CV, what kind of salary are you expecting? If you are not hunting for a job, don't waste your time. Don't look for a job. If you are hunting for a job, get an opportunity to go for an interview. This is the stage where you should then explore whatever need to be explored in terms of salaries and benefits. And also be very careful. If you start talking about the salary without showing the value that you can give to the employer, chances are you discourage the employer, you put off the employer, and they might not consider you for the next stage. And we get a lot of people who ask about salaries and package, and some people actually put their current package in their CV. Please don't do this. You discourage people who might actually be willing to negotiate and give you a very good deal if you put your salary details in the CV. Salaries are always negotiable. Packages are always negotiable. These must be left out and must be discussed when you get called for an interview. You must never put jargon in your CV unless this jargon is explaining the area of expertise. Don't put jargon. We have also seen CVs with charts and graphs. Please don't put charts and graphs. Pie charts in your graph, in your CV. These are not good for you. The other important part that you must also exclude from your CV is, please don't put your photo in your CV. Like I indicated previously, photos generate a lot of interest. People make judgments based on photos. And in some instances, we get CVs where the photo that the person puts in their CV is like someone who is on a police wanted list. The photo is not properly done and things like that. And the impression that it creates to a prospective employer that this person is not organized. So don't put a photo. The person who wants you or the employer who wants to employ you will see you at the interview stage. Why do you want to put your photo in the CV? Unless you are applying for a modeling agent's kind of job, yes, your photo will be crucial. And people who can put photos, there are some people who are very attractive who want to put their photos in. Yes, if you think your photo will help you get a job, you can put it, but most of the time it can actually discourage people from giving you an opportunity to go for an interview. So a photo for us, our recommendation is that a photo is a no-no. Please don't exaggerate anything. Don't put demands in your CV. Don't highlight weaknesses in your CV. All these things are not necessary to put in your CV. You can explore these issues when you get to an stage. Let's look at the 6 rules of getting hired in any economy. There is one important aspect that I want to highlight, and this important aspect, normally it's not evident in most of the CVs that we get. This important aspect is that always demonstrate the value that you are going to offer to the prospective employer. Most of the CVs that we get are written in generic terms. Someone copies their job description, pastes it in their CV, and they consider that to be a CV. In some instances, some people copy other people's CV, they forget to remove the name, they forget to remove certain details that belong to someone else. Then when you go through the CV, you find, no, this is not what the person is. This CV is talking about engineering, and this person is an accountant. So how do I take that CV, does not pay attention to detail? And how can any prospective employer entrust you with with their customers, for example, with their accounts, when you cannot fix or you cannot put your CV in order like that? So your CV, remember, is about the value that you create. And also, rule number 3, use social media. We'll talk about this in detail and other sites for job leads. Interviews, they're about you demonstrate not how important you are. You get what you negotiate, not what you deserve. The best way to re-enter the job market is never to leave the job market. It's a fact of life. Let's look at rule number 1. Always demonstrate the value. Your CV should be focused on the specific requirements of the position, like I've already indicated. What does the employer want? Do I have what the employer wants? It's always important, like I indicated previously, to refocus your CV, to customize your CV in line with whatever job you're applying for, rather than using a generic CV. Show promises to create the kind of value the hiring organization is seeking. What value are you going to create? And why should we trust you that you're going to create that value? What have you achieved before? This is what must be in the CV. You must state in very specific terms what you have achieved in the previous job. For example, grew market share from as low as 5% to as high as 30% within a period of 3 years. When I look at that kind of statement, it's a value statement. It's a results-based statement. If your CV is not written in a results-based statement, it's not going to help you get a job. For example, you find that someone says, I managed to build a robust IT system. What is robust? How do you measure robustness of an IT system? What value did you create for the customer? What value did you create for the shareholder? So it's very important for you when you're writing your CV to create value, to talk about value creation, to talk about the value that you have created. Okay? Rule number 2. It's about the value you create. Value is in the eyes of the beholder. The person making the hiring decision. Your CV is not about you. Most of the CVs that we get, people go to town talking about themselves, how good they are. For example, what is the point of writing in a CV that I'm a team player, I've got initiative, I'm a robust decision maker? Who would believe that, in all honesty, that you're a robust decision maker? Who knows you're a robust decision maker? All things are important to make sure that when you are writing your CV, it must be crafted in results-oriented language. And results-oriented language talks about what you have achieved. What value are you going to offer the prospective employer? How do you fill your CV with value? Identify the employer's keywords. For example, if the employer strategy is for them to be able to grow the market share, is for to be able to mobilize membership, then those are the things that must be in your CV. In terms of your key achievements, you must then highlight your experience in dealing with the issues that the employer is highlighting in the job adverts. List your experience, infuse your experience with value, select the best statements, format and refine your CV. All these things are very critical. How do I identify the employer's keyword? Okay? It's important when you look at the adverts. In some instances, you find the most adverts they've got, even if it's a one-word advert, normally there are keywords in that advert. Those are the keywords that you must highlight when you are actually preparing your CV. Employers will likely spot these words when they give your CV an initial look. For example, if you're in the banking sector and one of the key things is for you to mobilize deposits, to grow the market share. These things, when you then prepare your CV for a particular position targeted at these things, you must be able to highlight, I've mobilized so much deposits, I've grown the market share from this point to this point, so that the prospective employer get attracted to those keywords and they put your CV aside and say, look, I think this CV is very interesting. It's also important to the company's website and not the verbs or adjectives or skills that refer to key values in the company. In some instances, we get embarrassed. We invite people for interviews. They know nothing about them that they are going to work for. They have not done their research. They have not done the research in terms of the structure. They have not even visited the website. They don't know the company's values. These are critical issues. You must show the employer that you are interested in the job. It's not by chance that you are there. We have actually done your homework. Go through industry publication and use the keywords, especially if you cannot find an appropriate position description. As you conduct a job search, not common terms from one company to the next that represent value industry-wide. If you go into banking, for example, you'll find people talk about deposit mobilization. They talk about make sure that they increase their fee income. If you go into manufacturing, they talk about efficiency issues. Those are the issues that you must highlight. And employers will always look at these. Compile the list of keywords that you highlighted and organize them by category: strategy, advisory, knowledge, skills. Make sure you use keywords in appropriate context. When you list your experience, this is a platform to set the focus on your background. These experiences are important, but many times this is where people start and end as they prepare the CV. Many stop short of infusing their experience and the value, therefore not taking the interests of the employer into account, like we have indicated. When you are writing your experience, don't write it in a generic way, write in terms of value creation. What you have created, what you have done when you are writing your CV. As your CV, make sure it is the reverse chronological order. I think we have already touched on this. Your job titles, very critical. When you infuse your experience with value, revisit for this accomplishment. How did I create value in this area when I was working for this particular employer? Value in this sense is three aspects: the results that can be either quantified or qualified, or that include language an employer uses to express value. Okay, if you go into any industry, there are keywords that these employers use in order to show the value in any particular industry. Select the best statement. Okay, select and rank in order to the best or 5-6 value infused accomplishments statements according to the following criteria. Does this statement illustrate the specific value I have created? Is the value I have created useful to my prospective employer? Remember, there is no generic value that will apply to all the employers. The value must apply to the employer that you are targeting. Okay. The format of the CV, I think we have talked about this. The background, you can look at this slide just to have a look in terms of the structure. But more importantly, what I want to highlight at this stage is the first page of your CV must have everything that the employer must use to make a decision without even going to the next page. And the size of your CV, if someone to write 5-10 pages, what we recommend no more than 3 pages of your CV. And that is good enough. That should that should be enough to summarize everything that you need to put in any particular CV. Use social media to look for jobs. Twitter, Facebook, with the speed at which technology is moving, you will be left out if you are not on some of these social media. Because jobs are being posted there. People talk about jobs there. Talk about the hints about how to get jobs on this social media. So you need to make sure that you are on the social media. Okay. Let's now go to interviews. Another very important part. Assuming you have now been called for an interview. And remember again what I have already said. An interview is about the value that you demonstrate to the prospective employer. Before I even go into some of the things that you need to look at when you prepare for an interview, I just want to give you some of my experience. At some stage we interviewed people. Some people came, they didn't even have a tie, and this position was a very formal position where people need someone to be wearing formal clothes. And in some instances, you find people bring in their phones their smartphones and start fidgeting with the phones. And there is no point in you bringing your phone in an interview and you then apologize, say, look, let me switch it on. Why did you bring the cell phone on? These are some of the housekeeping issues that you need to take note. Your phone should never ring when you're in an interview, no matter how busy you are. And also don't go into an interview sweating, please. Make sure that you prepare preparation. If you know you're going to go for an interview, it's always good to make sure that you psych yourself up for the particular interview. Interview preparation can be divided into 3 categories. There's what we call the interview protocol. This is the accepted etiquette for interviews. Structure, the different structures. Content, we are talking about the question that normally are asked in any particular interview. Okay, let's look at the protocol. Be on time. And being on time does not mean you arrive with an hour left before the interview. In one sense, it is the time you need to be available to the interviewers. In another sense, it is the time you should be near the facility, but beyond the immediate physical environment of the interview location. You can plan your arrival to the general vicinity of the facility beyond the immediate physical environment of the interview up to as much as an hour ahead. You'll just be around. But to go at the reception area, we don't encourage you to be an hour earlier. It could also be an indication that you are very organized or that you are just desperate for a job. And you must not show the desperation in the interview. What we normally recommend is that 15 minutes before the interview is scheduled to begin, you must be there. You relax, get a magazine to read. Before the interview, please, when you get to the interview stage, to the reception area where you are going for the interview, please don't talk too much. Some people, they actually even disrupt the business of the day because they talk too much. They also go there and they start asking questions, interfering with the business of the day. Go there, get a chair, let the receptionist know that you are there for the interview. Sit down and read your magazine or read something else. Okay? What to take to the interview? It's very important. Keep it simple. Start with a black leather portfolio binder. A page is also important. A ballpoint pen. 2, especially in case one fails. It's also very important when you're in an interview to take notes, especially for senior positions. It's also very important to take notes so that when you then answer questions, you actually can answer questions in a chronological order. And you can also answer these questions addressing issues that have been raised by the interviewer. In some instances, people get asked questions in an interview, then they go completely off tangent talking about something else that has not been asked by the interviewer. It's very important to make sure that you take notes. You take your notes, list of references. Sometimes people ask you about references. You can also take extra copies of your CV. It's always a procedure. Your list of references. When you're putting your references, it's always important to make sure that you don't put references of people who are not going to add value to your success in terms of you getting a job. What I'm trying to highlight here is that in some instances, people put friends who are very rude when people call for references, or put people that they've never informed that they've put them as references. And these people can be very rude, and interviewers or employers will just put your CV aside or not even consider you if you put people who are going to be very rude in your as references. Okay? The contact information of each reference must be put in the right order. You start with the name, Mr. So-and-so, Director Human Resources, company, physical address, telephone number. If there's an email, you put an email. If you put the job title, former supervisor, former boss, whatever you want to put there, but it must be very clear. The structure of interviews. In some instances, people get called for psychometric tests. Psychometric tests, basically what they means is that your psychometric tests, you're talking about aptitude test. They could be aptitude tests or personality tests. Most employers now require people to go for psychometric tests. Some people are so scared of psychometric tests that they know they're going to fail, or they failed before so they don't want to go, or they gave you excuses. If the company's policy is for you to go through psychometric tests, no matter how many excuses you give, you'll be out of the race if you don't go for those tests. If the employer asks you to do something, if you are not interested, tell them you are not interested. One point of advice that we want to give to prospective employees is that it's always important for you, If someone calls you for an interview, especially where you have submitted your interview, please don't turn down the offer before you go for the interview. It's rude, and people might not consider you in future. Or the person that you have indicated you are not interested might be 2 years, 3 years down the line be working for an employer that you really want to work for, and they know this person normally does not come for interviews. Let's throw the CV away. So it's very important for you to be able to make sure that you at least go for interview. Don't turn down. It's always important to turn down when you've got an offer. That's the best way to turn down a job. Go through the emotions, turn down the offer, turn down the job. If you don't like it, once you've got an offer. That is always the professional way to do it. So what is the objective of you going to an interview? Is for you to stand out. And when I say for you to stand out is you must generate so much value, or you must show the employer that you've got so much value that you can generate for them that they will choose you as their best candidate. And it's always important to listen to the interviewer's question all the way through. Pause briefly and articulate an answer. The common mistake, formulating the answer before the interviewer is finished asking questions, is a very dangerous way of answering questions in the interview. Listen carefully before you answer. We know some interviewers, because they know so much information, before the interviewer is even finished asking the question, they already have an answer and they want to answer. Or they interrupt the interviewer. We do normally discourage you from doing this. This is not the best way to deal with interview questions. And also, you must expect unexpected questions when preparing for an interview, because interviews can be structured in several ways. And there is no standard. People, in some organizations, they are so disorganized. The interviews are not structured, and anyone can ask any questions. And some of them intrusive questions. You must always remain composed and answer the questions. Where you cannot answer, give a polite answer. The types of interviews that you might get, there could be one-on-one interviews. With maybe one person. In some cases, you get panel interviews. Be prepared for any one of these. For very senior positions, depending on the nature of the job, you might actually be invited for dinner or a lunch. Make sure you know all the etiquette required for you to be able to attend an executive lunch. And a lot of people that we have seen require a lot of grooming in terms of these issues, especially etiquette related to lunch, having lunch, executive lunch. You might be asked to do presentations, especially if the interview is involved in an assessment center. You might be involved in a role play. You might be involved in group discussions. You might be involved in telephone interviews, video interviews. All these things are things that are actually happening at the present moment. With the advent of Skype and the distance, in some instances, you might be asked to actually be available for a telephone interview. We have placed people who have been interviewed telephonically, and they've got jobs. We also could be interviewed via Skype video conferencing, and you must make sure you are prepared for that interview. You must make sure that you go to an area where the connectivity is good. You must always be dressed formally when you go for the interview. Much of the data gathered from interviews is to eliminate people rather than verify whether they are best suited for the job or at the end. So what it basically means is, when people are interviewing you, they are looking for facts to eliminate the people. This one is not good, this one is good. So be at your best when you go for the interview. When you are going for an interview, there are 3 steps that you must take note. Visit the company, visit what a company is trying to accomplish when filling the job for which you are applying. In some instances, some people are very lucky to have inside information about the company and what is required. Do your research. When you go for the interview, it will always help you to be able to understand and talk the same language, for the same page with the interviewers. Match your background against their interests. Align your experience to answer potentially difficult questions which might be asked by the interviewers. Interviewers usually have your copy of your CV in front of them, which they use to structure the interview. For example, they might ask, I noticed that you were a project manager for this company for 5 years. Tell me about that experience. Please don't just go there and start saying, I worked for this and that up to this date, I worked for this and this up to that date. When you get asked such kind of questions, they want to see the value that you have created within the period that you were working for that particular employer. So whatever you're going to be talking about, it must be about value creation. You might say, that's where I developed strength in this area, a couple of projects in a particular area we have worked on this project. What are the challenges that you have faced? How you dealt with those challenges? These are key things that you must highlight in your CV. Questions on shortcomings and failures. We find a lot of people struggle with these questions when they get asked what tell us about your shortcut, tell us about your most significant failure on a job. Wrong answer. I can't remember anything I have ever failed at. We get these questions every day. You can't be superhuman where you have not failed. People who say they have never failed can be divided into two categories. Those who have never tried anything challenging enough, that failure was a possibility, and those who do not have a good self-awareness. That's the answer that it becomes. So what do? Acknowledge the failures or difficulties that you have since corrected, e.g., early in my career, I needed better project management skills. Did develop as I took project management courses and gained more practical experience. So the way you answer that, highlight the failure and how you actually manage to come up with the solution to address the failures. That's how you answer the question. So the advice here, please don't say you have never failed, because there is no one who has never failed in their career. Okay? Questions on the shortcomings and failure. So what you do is describe the situation, explain the task or problem that you encountered. What action did you take? What was the result or outcome? What did you learn from the experience? The learning point is the critical part. What did you learn from the experience? And how did that help you? If the failure was 10 years back, how did that help you in your future career growth? Okay, questions on time gaps. No matter how long you have been out of work, you do not need to apologize or dwell on the subject. Okay? Don't dwell on the subject of you not having been. A lot of people, when they say, I understand there are gaps in your CV, they still go to town talking about they've been trying to do part work, piecework, they've done, they have been self-employed, they've done this and this, they were self-employed in their own business. All of us want our next job to be the right job. There's a search for the right job. You must, however, show that you have stayed busy in areas related to your job. That is what is critical in terms of these gaps. But don't make them a highlight of your interview. E.g., I noticed you have been out of work for 15 months. Why has it taken you so long to find another job? You get these kind of questions. Some of the time, the answer is, is the result of looking for the right opportunity with a company like yours. I have also used this time to give back to my church or whatever institution as an active volunteer, for example. These are the things that employers are looking for. Not to say I went into the diaspora and I was trying cross-border trading and things like that. Those things will put off the employer. They want to see that you've been doing something constructive that has got value to your business, to their business. The interviewer wants to know if you were fired from your last position, whether there is an underlying problem with you. Did you leave your last job voluntarily? The answer, I had a choice to make about whether I wanted to continue in a job with very little career upside. Since I needed to search for better opportunity full-time, I chose to look for a newer position. If not, I would not have found this opportunity. That's how you answer these questions. They are very tricky, but you must make sure that you understand. I would advise you to go through the notes in these slides and read them step by step so that at least you can understand them on your own. In this presentation, you can actually pause and read the slides, so it's very critical that you understand what I'm talking about here. Questions about conflicts with fellow employees. These are also common questions about your working relations in previous jobs are designed to uncover your familiarity with and use of conflict management skills. And in many positions, this is a very important skill, how you handle conflict, especially if you're in a customer-related kind of job. They will normally talk about questions related to how you have handled difficult customers before. For example, a question could be, tell me about a situation at work in which there was a conflict among employees and how you handled it. Please don't go and say, I have never had conflict or I have never handled conflict. Unless you're a recent graduate. Yes, that could be possible. But even for a recent graduate, it's still possible that you have handled conflict while you were still in college. So that is very important for you to be able to highlight those points. Answer, one of your high-performing teams started bickering among themselves. Once I confirmed that the others felt this way as well, as I sponsored an off-site meeting facilitated by an outsider, it turned out that there was a lot of confusion about roles and responsibilities. When these issues were clarified, the bickering stopped and productivity improved. These are the kinds of questions that people are looking for. And one other thing that I want to be able to highlight here, which I might not have time to highlight, is that when you go for an interview, please don't say bad things about your previous employer. And we find a lot of people, they beg by their previous employer or their current employer because they're for a job. They talk about issues. Yes, there might be issues to do with corporate governance. There might be issues to do with the other things that the previous employer or current employer is doing that you are not happy with. But the moment you do that with your prospective employer, they will deduce from that discussion that that's your nature, that's your personality, and you still continue doing that. You still say bad things about them when you want to leave. So please don't mention anything, any bad things about the previous employer. And there are interviewers, probably due to inexperience, who might ask you, tell us about what are the bad things that you don't like in your current job or your current employer. I would rather you focus on the positives. And the challenge is, obviously, there are issues to do with confidentiality. People will ask you these tricky questions so that they can actually see whether you can keep confidential information or not. So that is very important for you to take note. Questions are, if it at all possible, deflect questions about salary and indicate that you would consider any offer the company thinks reasonable, and that is the best way to answer. Or alternatively, what you can say is that you will consider an offer that is within your proper salary range. I'm assuming you have good grades in your organization, and there's a maximum, and I'll be willing to be within that particular range. And I also expect to be able to move within that salary range based on the value that I will demonstrate to you when I get offered this job. Some companies insist that you provide previous salary history. If so, provide the information and proceed with the interview. And please don't inflate the figures. Some people think, I've been invited for an interview by this company, which is a very good brand, so I must inflate what I earn in order for me to be able to get a huge package. In most cases, in a survey that we did, what puts off most of the employers when they are doing interviews, that people demanding exorbitant salaries or packages without actually demonstrating any value. In some instances, we even get people who actually demand certain types of cars. I want a Jeep Cherokee, I want a Mercedes-Benz, without even demonstrating any value, especially for executives. If you get people who are serious about what they do in their jobs in terms of interviewing, they will immediately when you leave, they will throw your CV away because of the demand that you place on them without demonstrating any value to the organization. Questions for you to ask. End of interview questions serve three purposes: to give you an opportunity to talk about aspects of the job for which you are a good fit, but may not have been covered; to clear up any confusion; to set up the stage for follow-up steps. So you must be prepared for that. Questions for you to ask. They might cover training program, career development opportunities, types of projects or responsibilities that the company is working in, the company strategy going forward. A reporting structure is also very critical for you to be able to clarify the reporting structure. What kind of performance assessment, what kind of the profile of their staff. Questions about topics raised in the interview are also critical. What happens next, for example? When do you expect this person to start if you were to offer them a job? Okay, these are the kind of good questions that you can ask. Questions that emphasize good fit. The interviewer might ask you, I have covered what I need. Do you have any questions for me? This is a very common question, and normally you don't get away without the interviewer asking you this question. The interviewee, how you can answer. I noticed in the position description that you wanted someone who is such. That's one of my strengths, and I want to make sure I have shared those details with you. Unless interrupted, please description of what you accomplished. The interviewer might not have touched on certain things that you think are key in terms of where you see this organization going. This is an opportunity for you to highlight whatever that you think will add more value to you getting noticed. Or you can ask, earlier you asked me about dash. I would like to add to that answer. Where you think you've given an inadequate answer, you can still go back. Like earlier you asked me about this question, I just wanted to add 1 or 2 points to your question, to answer your question. Then you expand, give more details. Maybe you'd forgotten, give more details. And the interviewers are always prepared to listen. Unless the interview is being done in a hurry, normally these interviewers are prepared to listen. Questions about the next step. End of interview in a way that gives you permission to conduct the company without appearing to be either over anxious or overbearing. For example, I have covered what I need. Do you have any questions for me? As an interviewer, when do you expect to make a decision? wait for an answer. Okay, don't rush. We must wait for an answer for that. I'll follow up in a couple of weeks just to check progress regarding this particular position. Or my understanding that you plan to make a decision by the middle of next month. Meanwhile, feel free to contact me if you have additional questions or something comes up. I will follow up with you as well. You give the interviewer such comfort that they feel you are a person who is very professional when you ask these kind of questions. Not to rush to go and ask about salaries or what type of car you're going to be driving, what kind of school fees benefit you're going to be getting, and whether you want to go to the Group A school or whatever. Those questions put off interviewers, so don't include those questions in when you've been given an opportunity to ask. One thing that we also wanted to take note of, the suggestions are not intended to cover every possible question type. There are many more questions you could be asked, and you can't, and you should try to prepare for all of them. Be willing to occasionally be surprised and have to think on your feet. These are very critical questions. And in some questions, in some instances, interviewers can even put you under very stressful conditions with the type of question that they ask you. They just want to see whether you're composed or not. So please don't get angry when people are asking you questions, very difficult questions in an interview, because it's part of the game. It's part of identifying what they need. In some instances, you also get companies that will take you out on an assessment center that can take 2 to 3 days, depending on the level of the person. And please make sure that all these things are you prepare for them. And when people ask you for an interview, to come for an interview, it's also important to ask them, roughly how long do you think these interviews are going to take, so that at least you don't jeopardize any other engagement that you might have during that particular day. Or in the middle of the interview, you indicate, I know I'm rushing for such kind of a meeting. Please never do that, because it shows you are not prepared. It shows you didn't plan in advance. While at least you have been given notice. In most cases, when people are being called for interviews, they are given enough notice for them to be able to prepare. I hope this presentation will give you insight into some of the things that you need to do. But this is not the end in itself. You need to do research. You need to make sure that you understand how interviews and CVs are prepared. And more importantly, just to summarize some of the things that I have highlighted, please, when you are applying for jobs, imagine that for every job that you apply, imagine that there are 40,000 more people who are actually better than you. So what will make you stand out of that group? So if you send a junk CV, chances are you'll not even be entertained. Your CV, they will just delete. If you don't get a good CV in, there are no chances. And in some instances, especially where people are sending us EVs, they send us these email CVs without even writing anything. When you are sending in your CV via email, it's better, if you know you are applying for a specific position, it's better to put under subject, ref, for example, application mechanical engineer post. So that when people are looking at it, they don't think it's junk mail. Some people don't put a subject on the email. They just attach the CV, no, nothing else. And most email systems will put the CVs under your junk mail. And most people don't read their junk mail. They just go in there and delete. So it's very important for you to be able to understand that. And also, when you apply for a job, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be called for an interview. Your chance will come, but all people think when they send their CV, they must always be called for an interview. That is not possible. And in most cases, because of the competition and the unemployment, you will find that it's not possible for all the people to be called for an interview. So it's very important for you to take note of this, but we also encourage you to research, read more, go onto the internet, find out more about interviews, find out about the writing. So this presentation is not exhaustive, but hopefully it has helped you. Thank you very much.